He was a soldier in 2 wars at the same time, one against the Germans and one against his own racist officers. He faced prison for obeying the law. If he had lost his sham trial, you would have never heard the name Jackie Robinson. Camp Hood in 1944 was a sprawling military installation in central Texas, a place where the contradictions of America's war effort collided with brutal clarity. The United States military was fighting a war against fascism in Europe, against an ideology that claimed racial superiority justified genocide. Yet at home, that same military enforced rigid segregation that treated black soldiers as second-class citizens in the very uniform they wore to defend their country. For black officers like Robinson, these contradictions weren't abstract. They were daily humiliations. Robinson had arrived at Camp Hood in April 1944, assigned to the 761st Tank Battalion, an all-black unit that would later earn the nickname the Black Panthers and become one of the most decorated units of World War II. The battalion was commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Paul L. Bates, a white officer who genuinely respected his black soldiers and pushed them toward excellence. Under Bates, Robinson thrived, appointed as the battalion's morale officer due to his influence over the men. But Robinson's path to Camp Hood had been marked by constant battles against discrimination. Born in Cairo, Georgia in 1919, Robinson was the youngest of 5 children in a sharecropping family. After his father abandoned them, his mother, Mally, moved the family to Pasadena, California, working multiple jobs as a domestic worker to support her children. At UCLA, Robinson became the first athlete in the university's history to win varsity letters in 4 sports: baseball, basketball, football, and track. He was already a national celebrity when he was drafted in April 1942. His military service began with a fight. At Fort Riley, Kansas, Robinson applied for officer candidate school. Despite Army policy providing for integrated OCS facilities, Robinson was initially rejected. Off the record, he was told black soldiers were excluded because they supposedly lacked leadership ability. Only after intervention from boxing champion Joe Louis, who was stationed at Fort Riley and had befriended Robinson, did the Army relent. Robinson graduated OCS on January 28, 1943, receiving his commission as a 2nd lieutenant. But his commission couldn't shield him from Jim Crow. At Fort Riley, Robinson challenged the segregated seating at the Post Exchange, successfully persuading officials to enlarge the colored-only section, where black soldiers frequently couldn't find seats. He qualified as an expert marksman with the M1 Garand rifle, despite never feeling comfortable with weapons or horses. The cavalry was not his element. When assigned to the 761 Tank Battalion at Camp Hood, Robinson found in Colonel Bates a commander who shared his belief that black soldiers deserved equal treatment. By July 1944, Robinson's ankle, injured playing football years earlier, had become a significant concern. In January, an Army medical board had found him fit only for limited duty. On June 21st, he was ordered to McCloskey General Hospital in Temple, Texas, 30 miles from Camp Hood, for final evaluation of his fitness for combat. The injury would ultimately prevent him from deploying overseas with the 761 Est, a unit that would go on to fight for 183 consecutive days in Europe, longer than virtually any other American unit, and participate in major campaigns, including the Battle of the Bulge. On the evening of July 6th, while awaiting test results at the hospital, Robinson obtained a pass to visit Camp Hood. He arrived around 7:30 p.m., hoping to see his battalion. Instead, he discovered they were away on maneuvers. Robinson stopped at the Black Officers Club, where he socialized with friends for a few hours. A teetotaler who never drank, Robinson spent the evening in conversation before boarding a bus around 10 p.m. to return to the hospital. At stop 23, Robinson boarded a shuttle bus operated by the Southwestern Bus Company, driven by a civilian named Milton Renegar. The bus operated within Camp Hood, transporting soldiers and civilians across the sprawling installation to the central bus station, a transfer point where passengers could board other buses for destinations off-post. Boarding the bus, Robinson recognized Virginia Jones, the wife of another black lieutenant in the 761. Jones was light-skinned enough to be frequently mistaken for white. Robinson sat down next to her in the fourth seat from the rear, what Jones herself would later testify she always considered the rear of the bus, and the two began chatting. Several blocks later, driver Milton Renegar glanced in his rearview mirror and saw what he perceived to be a black officer sitting next to a white woman. He had made an assumption that would set in motion a chain of events threatening to destroy Robinson's life. "Hey, you! Sitting beside that woman!" Renegar yelled. "Get to the back of the bus!" Robinson ignored the order. Renegar stopped the bus, marched back to where Robinson and Jones sat, and demanded that Robinson get to the back of the bus where the colored people belong. Robinson refused. What Renegar didn't know, what he apparently didn't care to know, was that Robinson was completely within his rights. Just 1 month earlier, in June 1944, the War Department had explicitly ordered the desegregation of military buses operating on Army posts. The directive was born from practical necessity and mounting pressure from civil rights organizations. Segregation on military transportation had become a flashpoint for racial tension. Black soldiers returning from combat training were being forced to sit in the back of buses while German prisoners of war sat up front. The contradiction had become too glaring to ignore. Robinson was aware of the regulation. He'd read about boxers Joe Louis and Sugar Ray Robinson refusing to move to the backs of buses in the South, and the resulting publicity had prompted the Army's policy change. He also knew he was on federal property, not subject to Texas's Jim Crow laws. The Army recently issued orders that there is to be no more racial segregation on any Army post, Robinson told the driver. This is an Army bus operating on an Army post. Renegar was unmoved. He promised Robinson there would be consequences when they reached the bus station. He kept his promise. At the central bus station, the station dispatcher appeared. Turning to Renegar, he asked if Robinson was the one causing trouble. Shortly thereafter, 2 military police officers arrived. They approached Robinson and asked if he would be willing to come with them to answer questions. Robinson, believing he had nothing to hide, agreed. At the MP station, Robinson's ordeal escalated rapidly. The officer of the day was Captain P-Law Wigginton, the camp's laundry officer pulling duty rotation. When Robinson arrived, one of the escorting MPs, Private First Class George A. Mucklerath, began giving his version of events. Robinson tried to interrupt, insisting Mucklerath's account was inaccurate. Wigginton told him to stop interrupting. Then, according to testimony that would emerge at trial, Mucklerath asked another MP, Corporal George Elwood, if he had a racist language flag lieutenant in the car. Robinson's response was immediate and forceful. He told the enlisted man that, if he ever called me that word again, I would break him in two. Captain Wigginton, apparently feeling out of his depth, called for Captain Gerald M. Bear, the Assistant Provost Marshal and commander of the Military Police Detachment. Bear, a Southerner, would prove to be Robinson's chief antagonist in the hours ahead. When Bear arrived, Robinson attempted to follow him into the guard room to give his side of the story. Bear stopped him. "Nobody comes in the room until I tell him," Bear said. Yet Private Mucklerath was already in the room and allowed to remain. Bear appeared to want Mucklerath's account, not Robinson's. Robinson was ordered into an adjacent receiving room, separated from the guard room by an open door. Standing near the doorway, Robinson could hear Wigginton briefing Bear on Mucklerath's testimony. Testimony Robinson knew was false. Multiple times, Robinson interrupted to correct inaccuracies in Mucklerath's statement. Bear ordered Robinson to sit in a chair at the far end of the receiving room, away from the door, so he couldn't hear or interrupt. The confrontation escalated. Robinson, frustrated and angry, began questioning Bear about his status. Was he under arrest? If not, why was he being detained? Bear gave ambiguous answers. At one point, Bear told Robinson he could stand at ease, a military posture that allowed some movement and informality, but then criticized Robinson's disrespectful demeanor. Also present during the interrogation was Bear's secretary, a white civilian woman. When Robinson protested the line of questioning, which he believed was racially motivated, The secretary became upset and left the room. This interaction would later be twisted into one of the original charges, insulting a civilian woman. Throughout the interrogation, Robinson maintained his composure but refused to back down. He demanded clarification about whether he was under arrest. He insisted his actions on the bus were lawful. He objected to the racial prejudice he perceived in how he was being treated. To Captain Bear, a white Southern officer accustomed to deference from black soldiers, Robinson's assertiveness read as insubordination. Bear would later characterize Robinson's behavior as disrespectful, impertinent, and sloppy. In his view, Robinson was uppity, a black man who didn't know his place. After the interrogation concluded, Bear arranged transportation for Robinson back to the hospital, but Robinson stated he didn't want to return yet. His pass was valid until 8 a.m. the following morning. Captain Wigginton, viewing this refusal as further disrespect, threatened to arrest Robinson for insubordination. Eventually, Robinson was escorted back to McCloskey Hospital and confined to quarters. But his troubles were just beginning. On July 13th, a document was sent to the Commanding General of WWII Corps with an investigation report. On July 17th, formal charges were filed against Second Lieutenant Jack R. Robinson. He faced 6 distinct violations of the Articles of War: violation of Article 63, behaving with disrespect toward Captain Gerald M. Bear by contemptuously bowing to him and giving him several sloppy salutes, repeating several times, "Okay, sir," or words to that effect, and by acting in an insolent, impertinent, and rude manner. Violation of Article 64, willful disobedience of Captain Bear's lawful command to sit in a chair away from the door, disturbing the peace, conduct unbecoming an officer, insulting a civilian woman, drunkenness. The charges were explosive. If convicted on all counts, Robinson could face dishonorable discharge, imprisonment, and the complete destruction of his military career and reputation. But there was a problem. Robinson's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates, read the charges and the investigative report, and believed Captain Bear had conducted an incompetent investigation. Bates knew Robinson's character. He trusted Robinson's account, and he absolutely refused to sign the court-martial papers. Without Bates's signature, the charges couldn't proceed. The solution was as cynical as it was efficient. Transfer Robinson to a different unit. On July 24th, Robinson was reassigned from the 761st Tank Battalion to the 758th Tank Battalion, part of the 5th Armored Group. The 758th's commanding officer had no personal relationship with Robinson and no reason to question the charges. He signed the papers. Years later, Colonel Bates's wife, Taffy, would confirm what everyone suspected. Robinson was transferred from the 761 S8 because Paul refused to sign court-martial papers. Robinson now faced trial. The stakes couldn't have been higher. A guilty verdict would mean disgrace, the end of any military career, and a permanent stain on his record that would follow him for life. In 1944, no one could have predicted Robinson's future in baseball, but they could predict that a dishonorable discharge would close virtually every door available to a black man in Jim Crow America. Robinson needed help. The Army assigned him a defense attorney, Second Lieutenant William Klein, a young lawyer from Texas. But Klein had a problem, and to his credit, he admitted it immediately. "I was raised in the South," Klein told Robinson. "I haven't developed arguments against segregation. I don't think I can be objective." It was an extraordinary moment of honesty from a white Southern lawyer who recognized his own limitations. Rather than defend Robinson half-heartedly, Klein recommended another officer, First Lieutenant Robert H. Johnson, a 32-year-old lawyer from Bay City, Michigan. Johnson had courtroom experience and no Southern background to bias him against a black defendant. Robinson agreed to the change. Johnson became his primary defense counsel, with Klein remaining as co-counsel. The choice would prove crucial. As the trial date approached, Robinson reached out for support. He wrote to Truman K. Gibson, the War Department's civilian aide for matters concerning black soldiers, describing the incident and asking if the newspapers should be notified. Gibson told an aide to follow the case carefully. Senators Sheridan Downey and Hiram Johnson, both from Robinson's home state of California, made inquiries to the Army about the case. The black press began picking up the story. The Pittsburgh Courier and Chicago Defender mentioned the impending court-martial. For the Army, this was becoming a public relations problem. Robinson wasn't just any black lieutenant. He was a celebrity athlete whose name was known nationally. Civil rights organizations, including the NAACP, were beginning to pay attention. Colonel Edward A. Kimball, commander of the 5th Armored Group, recognized the volatility. On July 17th, he phoned Colonel Walter D. Bye, Chief of Staff of WWII Corps, begging him to send an independent investigator. "This is a very serious case, and it's full of dynamite," Kimball explained. He added that the bus situation at Camp Hood is not at all good, and feared any officer in charge of troops at this post might be prejudiced. Bye refused to help. By the time the trial date arrived, some movement had occurred in Robinson's favor. 4 of the 6 charges were dropped entirely: disturbing the peace, conduct unbecoming an officer, insulting a civilian woman, and drunkenness. The prosecution couldn't sustain them. Robinson would stand trial on only 2 charges, both stemming from his interactions with Captain Bear, behaving with disrespect toward a superior officer and willfully disobeying a lawful command. Critically, the trial would focus exclusively on Robinson's conduct at the MP station. The judges would hear nothing about the bus incident itself, the very event that had triggered everything. The question before the court was narrow. Had Robinson been insubordinate to Captain Bear? Everything else, the legitimacy of Renegar's order, the racial slurs, the broader context of segregation, was technically irrelevant. On August 2nd, 1944, at 1:45 p.m., the United States vs. Second Lieutenant Jack R. Robinson began. The court-martial tribunal consisted of 9 officers ranging in rank from captain to colonel. Research by military historian Adam Kama would later reveal something that had been unknown for decades. 2 of the 9 judges were black. In a segregated military, this was extraordinary. It meant that at least some of the officers deciding Robinson's fate might understand the racial dynamics at play. 6 votes were required for conviction. The prosecution presented its case first, calling Captain Bear and Captain Wigginton as witnesses. Bear testified that Robinson had behaved disrespectfully and disobeyed orders during the interrogation on July 6th. Wigginton corroborated Bear's account, describing Robinson as very disrespectful. Then Lieutenant Johnson began his cross-examination. Johnson was methodical and devastating. He had Robinson's version of events, and he had studied the inconsistencies in the prosecution's case. Now he exploited them. Under Johnson's questioning, Bear admitted he had told Robinson he could stand at ease during the interrogation, undermining the claim that Robinson's casual posture was disrespectful. More critically, Bear conceded that he had never given Robinson a clear, direct order during the interrogation. When pressed repeatedly on exactly what command he had given Robinson, Bear couldn't provide a specific answer. If there was no clear order, there could be no willful disobedience. Johnson also recalled Corporal Elwood as a witness. He asked Elwood directly, "Did Private First Class Mucklerath ever ask you at any time if you had a racist language flag, Lieutenant, in your car?" "Yes, sir, he did," Elwood answered, "at the bus station." With that single exchange, Johnson exposed the racial animus underlying the entire incident. This wasn't about military discipline or respect for authority. This was about white enlisted men and officers who couldn't tolerate a black lieutenant asserting his rights. Robinson testified in his own defense. Johnson wanted the court to see Robinson not as the uppity troublemaker of the prosecution's imagination, but as an educated, articulate officer who had been subjected to racial harassment. Robinson's testimony was measured and precise. He explained his knowledge of the Army's desegregation order for military buses. He described the racial slur and his response to it. When asked if he knew what the offensive word meant, Robinson gave an answer that echoed across the courtroom. "I looked it up once, but my grandmother gave me a good definition. She was a slave, and she said the definition of the word was a low, uncouth person. I don't consider myself to be low and uncouth." The courtroom was silent. Robinson denied willfully disobeying any order. He explained that his only frustration during the interrogation was that Captain Bear wouldn't tell him clearly whether he was under arrest, and if not, why he was being held and questioned. By Bear's own admission, he had given Robinson ambiguous answers. Unlike the prosecution's witnesses, Robinson was subjected to virtually no challenging cross-examination. His account was consistent, credible, and calm. Then Johnson called character witnesses, white superior officers from Robinson's battalion. Captain James R. Lawson and Lieutenant Harold Kingsley testified about Robinson's exemplary service. But the most powerful testimony came from Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates himself. Bates didn't just vouch for Robinson's character, he effusively praised him. Bates described Robinson as an outstanding officer, a leader who commanded respect from his men, and a credit to the 761 Tank Battalion. His endorsement was so strong and went on at such length that the prosecution and the presiding judge had to direct Bates to limit his answers to the questions asked. The message to the court was unmistakable. Robinson's own battalion commander believed so strongly in his innocence that he had refused to sign the court-martial papers, leading to Robinson's transfer. In his closing argument, Johnson framed the case clearly. According to Robinson's later recollection, Johnson told the court, "This was not a case involving any violation of the Articles of War or even of military tradition, but simply a situation in which a few individuals sought to vent their bigotry on a Negro they considered uppity because he had the audacity to exercise rights that belonged to him as an American and a soldier." The court-martial lasted 4 hours and 15 minutes. The 9 officers deliberated by secret written ballot. At approximately 6 p.m., they announced their verdict. Not guilty on all specifications and charges. Jackie Robinson was acquitted. The relief must have been overwhelming, but Robinson knew the victory was incomplete. His military career was effectively over. 2 weeks earlier, on July 21st, Army doctors had determined his ankle injury was permanent. The 761st Tank Battalion, his unit, would deploy to Europe without him. They would land at Omaha Beach on October 10th, fight at the Battle of the Bulge, breach the Siegfried Line, and become one of the most decorated units of the war, earning a Presidential Unit Citation and more than 300 Purple Hearts. Jackie Robinson would not be with them. The court-martial had cleared his name, but soured him on military service. A month earlier, he had been willing to waive compensation for his injury and deploy overseas. Now his main desire was to leave the Army entirely. Robinson requested discharge. He was transferred to Camp Breckinridge, Kentucky, where he served as an athletics coach for black soldiers while his request was processed. On November 28, 1944, Jackie Robinson received an honorable discharge from the United States Army. At Camp Breckinridge, Robinson met Ted Alexander, a black soldier tossing a baseball. They struck up a conversation. Alexander told Robinson there was good money to be made playing in the Negro Leagues. Robinson had never seriously considered professional baseball as a career. He had been more focused on football and basketball, but with his military career over and his ankle preventing him from playing football at a high level, baseball seemed like a possibility. In 1945, Robinson signed with the Kansas City Monarchs of the Negro Leagues for $400 a month. He traveled across the Midwest, playing excellent baseball, but finding the travel exhausting and the segregation degrading. He later called it a pretty miserable way to make a buck. But someone was watching. Branch Rickey, president and general manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers, was looking for the right man to break baseball's color barrier. Rickey wasn't just looking for a great player. He needed someone with the character to withstand the abuse, threats, and pressure that would inevitably come. He needed someone who had proven he could stand up to injustice without being destroyed by it. Rickey knew about the court-martial. He had researched Robinson's background exhaustively. The story of how Robinson had stood his ground on that bus, faced down a military justice system designed to break him, and emerged with his integrity intact. That story likely played a significant role in Rickey's decision. On October 23, 1945, Jackie Robinson signed a contract with the Montreal Royals, a Brooklyn Dodgers minor league affiliate, for $600 a month. He played the 1946 season in Montreal, leading the team to the International League Championship. On April 15, 1947, Jackie Robinson walked onto Ebbets Field in Brooklyn wearing number 42. Before a crowd of 26,623 spectators, approximately 14,000 of them black, Robinson took the field as a Brooklyn Dodger, becoming the first African American to play Major League Baseball in the modern era. The path from that courtroom in Texas to that diamond in Brooklyn was direct. If Robinson had been convicted in August 1944, Branch Rickey never would have signed him. The Dodgers couldn't risk their groundbreaking integration experiment on a player with a dishonorable discharge. The court-martial would have derailed everything. But Robinson had won, and 3 years later, he changed America. The significance of Robinson's baseball career is well documented. Rookie of the Year in 1947, Most Valuable Player in 1949, 6 World Series appearances, including 1 championship in 1955, 6 All-Star selections, election to the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1962. But the significance went far beyond statistics. As historian Henry Louis Gates Jr. observed, "It is so easy for us to underestimate the enormous significance, both symbolically and politically, of Jackie Robinson's integration of Major League Baseball. His courage and bravery played a major role in the history of integration, both on the field and throughout American society, and no history of the civil rights movement would be complete without noting Robinson's major role." Robinson himself understood the connection between his military service and his later battles. In his autobiography, he wrote of his acquittal at Camp Hood. "It was a small victory, for I had learned that I was in 2 wars, one against the foreign enemy, the other against prejudice at home." The lessons from that 1944 courtroom stayed with Robinson. When he faced racist taunts from opposing players, death threats from fans, and deliberate attempts to injure him with spikes and beanballs, he drew on the same strength that had gotten him through the court-martial. Branch Rickey had famously asked Robinson if he had the guts not to fight back. Robinson did. Not because he was weak, but because he understood strategic resistance. The court-martial had taught him that the system could be made to work, that justice was possible even in an unjust society, but only if you were willing to stand your ground while also playing by the rules designed to keep you down. It was a delicate balance, asserting your rights without giving authorities an excuse to destroy you. Robinson played that balance perfectly. The men involved in Robinson's court-martial had varied fates. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates led the 761 Tank Battalion through some of the fiercest fighting of the European campaign. He was wounded in combat, but survived the war and received numerous decorations. Bates never forgot Robinson, maintaining that his refusal to sign the court-martial papers was one of the proudest moments of his career. Captain Gerald Bear faded into obscurity. His conduct during the Robinson incident was never formally criticized, but the acquittal implicitly repudiated his handling of the case. Lieutenant Robert H. Johnson returned to Michigan after the war and resumed his law practice. For decades, his role in Robinson's defense was largely forgotten. Most accounts credited only William Klein. It wasn't until 1997 that historian Adam Karma's research fully documented Johnson's crucial contribution. Karma's article, Fair Play and Justice, The Court-Martial of Jackie Robinson, won the Keith E. Nelson Distinguished Service Award for exceptional published literary work advancing the understanding of military law. The 761st Tank Battalion became one of the war's most celebrated units. They fought for 183 consecutive days without respite, participated in 4 major campaigns, and inflicted over 130,000 casualties on German forces. They received 11 Silver Stars, 69 Bronze Stars, and approximately 300 Purple Hearts. In 1978, the unit received a Presidential Unit Citation. Their motto, "Come Out Fighting," became legendary. Jackie Robinson never regretted missing that deployment. Years later, when asked about not serving in combat, he said he had fought his own war, one that was just as important. The broader context of Robinson's court-martial reveals how common such incidents were. The Pittsburgh Courier, a leading black newspaper, cited a mountain of complaints from Negro soldiers about humiliations on buses in the South. In Durham, North Carolina, just weeks before Robinson's arrest, a confrontation on a bus ended with a driver shooting and killing a black soldier who had refused to move to the back. Robinson's case received attention because of his celebrity status and because he had excellent legal representation. Thousands of other black soldiers faced similar discrimination without those advantages. Many were convicted, dishonorably discharged, and had their lives destroyed by a military justice system that enforced Jim Crow. The Army's official policy barring segregation on military buses, issued in June 1944, was supposed to address these problems. But as Robinson's case demonstrated, policies meant nothing if they weren't enforced. Local commanders interpreted directives as they wished. Civilian bus drivers working on military bases ignored regulations with impunity. White officers like Captain Bear saw black assertions of legal rights as insubordination. The contradiction was stark. The United States was fighting a war against Nazi Germany's racial ideology while maintaining its own system of racial oppression. Black soldiers were asked to fight and die for freedoms they themselves didn't possess. As one anonymous black soldier stationed in Mississippi wrote in 1942, "We are treated like wild animals, like we are inhuman. The word Negro is never used here. All they call us are racist language flag. Do this, racist language flag, that. Even the officers here are calling us racist language flag." This was the military Jackie Robinson served in. This was the system he challenged on that bus in Texas, and this was the justice system that tried to break him. The fact that Robinson was acquitted owed something to luck. He had good lawyers, attention from the press, and 2 black officers on his court-martial panel. But it owed more to Robinson's own character. He had stood his ground without crossing the line into behavior that would have justified conviction. He had demanded his rights without giving authorities the excuse they wanted to destroy him. He had been articulate, calm, and credible on the witness stand, and he had told the truth, consistently and powerfully, in a way that made his innocence undeniable. 3 years later, when Branch Rickey asked if Robinson could endure racial abuse without fighting back, Robinson was ready. He had already proven it in a Texas courtroom. Robinson's baseball career lasted only 9 years. He retired in 1956 at age 37, his body worn down by the physical and emotional toll of breaking the color barrier. But in those 9 years, he transformed American sports and helped catalyze the broader civil rights movement. His success proved that integration could work, that black Americans could compete and excel on equal terms with whites if given the chance. Robinson remained active in civil rights work throughout his life. He supported the NAACP, marched with Martin Luther King Jr., and used his fame to advocate for racial justice. He also became a successful businessman and political activist, though his moderate Republican politics sometimes put him at odds with more radical civil rights activists. Robinson died of a heart attack on October 24, 1972, at age 53. By then he had achieved iconic status, but he never forgot where he came from or the battles that made his success possible. In 1997, on the 50th anniversary of Robinson breaking the color barrier, Major League Baseball retired his number 42 across all teams, the only player in any major professional sport to receive such an honor. Every April 15th, Jackie Robinson Day, every player in Major League Baseball wears number 42. But the courtroom in Camp Hood is forgotten. The 9 officers who acquitted Robinson are nameless to history. Lieutenant Robert Johnson's crucial role wasn't documented until more than 50 years later. The bus driver, the MPs, Captain Bear, they're footnotes. What remains is the story of a man who refused to move to the back of a bus because he knew the law was on his side, who stood before a military court and told the truth, who survived a system designed to break him and emerged stronger. Jackie Robinson's legacy isn't just about baseball. It's about the courage to challenge injustice, even when the cost could be everything. It's about understanding that sometimes the most important battles are fought not on distant battlefields, but in courtrooms and on bus seats, and in all the small moments where someone must decide whether to accept indignity or demand their rights. On July 6, 1944, Jackie Robinson made that decision. He refused to move. He accepted the consequences. He fought back within the system, and he won. 3 years later, he walked onto a baseball diamond and changed American history. But the foundation for that moment was built in a military courtroom in Texas, where 9 officers decided that justice mattered more than prejudice. That decision, that small victory in a war against prejudice at home, made everything else possible. Without it, there would be no Brooklyn Dodger in number 42, no integration of baseball, no symbol of possibility for millions of black Americans who saw in Jackie Robinson proof that the barriers could be broken. The court-martial that could have erased Jackie Robinson from history instead forged him into the man who would change it forever.